Karen called the cops about my fence. The sheriff charged her with trespassing. It's wild how quickly a weekend project can turn into a police report. One moment I was planting jasmine vines along a new fence line. The next, a screaming woman was climbing into my yard, shrieking about aesthetics, waving a clipboard, and calling 911 on me. But here's what she didn't know. The fence was built fully on my property. I had the permits, the land records, the flagged boundaries, and the man she summoned was a county sheriff who'd already received 2 complaints about her. By the end of the afternoon, she'd be the one in cuffs charged with trespassing, vandalism, and filing a false report. And that was just the beginning, because Karen, she wasn't just mad about the fence. She was running a fake HOA ring built on threats, fear, and phony documents. And by the time we uncovered what she'd really been up to, half the neighborhood was ready to revolt. The first time I met Karen, she didn't introduce herself with a name. She introduced herself with a threat. It was early spring, and I'd just started building the new fence along the southern edge of my lot. I'd inherited the place from my grandpa, a half-acre stretch with cracked concrete, an old tool shed, and an outdated wire fence that leaned like a drunk uncle. I'd spent months saving up, planning the rebuild down to the inch. I even had the property map framed on the fridge. So when Karen showed up in the middle of me post-setting, storming across my yard like she was walking into a crime scene, I didn't expect a neighborly welcome. "What do you think you're doing?" she barked. I set the post hole digger down and turned, breathing heavy, building a fence. "You're violating the Willow Acres Aesthetic Boundary Agreement," she said, flipping open a laminated folder. I blinked. "I'm sorry," what she shoved a paper toward me. Notice of Fence Violation. Section 2. 8B. No perimeter structure may exceed 48 inches in height or encroach on shared view lines. I looked it over. It had no county seal, no name. Just a header that read, Willow Acres Neighborhood Preservation Society. I was polite. "At first, there's no HOA here," I said. Karen sniffed. "That's where you're wrong. We're a voluntary civic board, and we've had these rules since 1999. If you'd attended the meetings, you'd know." "I just moved here," I replied, "and the fence is on my land. I have the plat map and a signed permit." Her smile went tight. "Then I guess we'll let the sheriff sort it out." She walked off without another word, heels clicking like a judge exiting court. That evening, a yellow envelope appeared on my door. "Final warning: construction must cease immediately or enforcement will be contacted." I called my neighbor, Rick, who'd lived next door for 20 years. Vietnam vet, liked to mow shirtless and talk politics at 7 I asked him, "Is there really an HOA here?" Rick just laughed. "Karen, she's been trying to resurrect one for years. Posts fake notices, hosts compliance meetings in her garage. Don't give her a damn thing. She said she was calling the sheriff." He spat into a coffee can. "Good. Maybe they'll finally deal with her." The next day, I kept building. I had every right to. Then came the trespassing. It was around 10:45 a.m. when I heard the creak of my side gate. I turned to see Karen, clipboard in one hand, phone in the other, walking across my lawn like she'd been summoned to audit the place. "You were told to stop," she said. "This is your final notice." I pointed. "You just walked through my gate. That's private property." She smirked. "The covenant allows inspection if a property is in non-compliance." That's when I pulled out my phone. "You mind saying that again?" On camera, she went pale. Then she lunged. Not at me, at the phone. She slapped it clean out of my hand. It hit the grass and tumbled once. When I picked it up, it was still recording. "Great," I said. "Thanks for the evidence." She stormed off, muttering something about the sheriff, but this time she actually followed through. 20 minutes later, a cruiser rolled up. Out stepped Sheriff Dawson, a no-nonsense, big-shouldered man with the kind of face that looked permanently unimpressed. He walked up slow, hands on his belt, and said, "Got a call about a fencing dispute." Karen came skipping down her porch like she was on a reality show. "There he is. That's him." He's putting up a fence in violation of community code. I told him 3 times to stop and he threatened me. The sheriff turned to me. You got ID? I nodded and handed it over. He flipped it open, then looked past me at the freshly cemented fence posts. You got a permit. I walked him over to the tool shed and pulled the laminated copy off the wall, showed him the flagged survey line, even pointed out the notarized letter from the county recorder. Dawson looked it over, then turned to Karen. Ma'am, this is all in order. Karen's face twisted. He pushed me. He screamed at me. Dawson raised an eyebrow. You have video? No, but he does. I held up my phone. She came onto my property, smacked the phone out of my hand, and called you under false pretenses. I played the clip. The sheriff didn't say a word, just stood there, watching it play out. Karen's voice shrill, her hand swinging into the camera, her claim about the covenant. When the video ended, he let out a slow sigh. Then he reached for his ticket pad. Ma'am, he said, step back from the property. Excuse me, you're being cited for trespassing and false reporting. Karen's voice cracked. But I was trying to enforce. You don't have any enforcement authority. He cut in. There is no active HOA. What you're running is a private club at best and harassment at worst. He clicked the pen. Consider this your real final warning. She turned to me like I just betrayed the queen. You'll regret this. I smiled. I really don't think I will. But here's the thing, I thought it was over. I thought the ticket and the public embarrassment would send her packing. I didn't realize yet how deep her fake HOA really went. How many people had paid her, how many she'd threatened, and how far she'd go to protect it. It started with a knock on my door. 2 days after the sheriff ticketed Karen, it was Mrs. Hernandez, mid-60s, soft-spoken, with a blue walker and a house full of hummingbird feeders. She looked nervous, holding a wrinkled manila envelope in both hands. She fined me too, she said. Inside the envelope were 4 pink slips marked community notice, immediate payment required. Each one listed a violation: unapproved seasonal decor, overgrown side yard, porch clutter, excessive dog barking. At the bottom of each fine, 45, payable to WANPS, Willow Acres Neighborhood Preservation Society, paid by check. All cashed, she whispered. I thought it was real. That envelope kicked off something bigger, because I started asking questions, went door to door, talked to folks I'd only ever waved at. What I found left me stunned. A newlywed couple was charged $200 for urban-style lighting after hanging string bulbs on their porch. A Korean War veteran had been threatened with community court for installing a flagpole in his front yard. A single dad paid $75 for having a basketball hoop on his driveway. Karen had been running a full-on racket under the name of an HOA that didn't exist. She called it a neighborhood board, but there were no elections, no open meetings, no documentation filed with the county, just her, a few followers, and a printer. I went back to Sheriff Dawson. He was already working the case. Turns out, I wasn't the only one who filed a complaint. 6 others had stepped forward since the fence incident. Some had receipts. Some had emails. Some had been too scared to say anything until now. Dawson showed me a manila folder. Thing is, he said, none of this is legally binding, but it's enough to start a fraud investigation. Then he leaned forward. What I need is a paper trail. So that's what I set out to find. It wasn't hard. Karen was organized. I'll give her that. Her vanity site, Willow Acres Compliance org, was a goldmine. I scrolled through pages of bogus rules, lawn height minimums, curtain color codes, even one about excessive porch personalities. Whatever that meant, I found PDFs marked citation templates, violation logs, and board meeting minutes with only her name listed under every position: president, treasurer, compliance officer. She was her own HOA. Then I hit the jackpot. A downloadable Excel file titled WANPS. Dues record confidential. Over $36,000 logged in a year. Each entry listed a name, address, date, and infraction. Many had payment notes, Venmo, Zelle, even Target gift cards. I printed it, all of it. The next neighborhood meeting was scheduled for Thursday night. Normally, maybe 10 people showed up. That night, over 60, and I wasn't the only one holding paper. Mrs. Hernandez came. So did the veteran, the newlyweds, the single dad, and a dozen more with files, receipts, and stories that sounded like something out of a grift documentary. We didn't scream, we didn't chant, we just told the truth. One by one, at the end, I stood and held up the file. This is fraud, this is manipulation, and this is theft. Then I said the one thing that shifted the room. We're not just neighbors anymore. We're victims. You could feel the air change. People looked around not in fear, but in recognition. Because they hadn't been alone. They'd just been made to feel that way. And when people realized the fear wasn't real, that's when the real change starts. By Friday morning, the files were in the sheriff's hands, not copies, originals, the spreadsheet, the forged notices, the video of her trespassing, sworn statements from 18 residents. Sheriff Dawson called me that afternoon. She's built herself a little dictatorship, he said, and she made one mistake too many. What's that? She called me at 3:10 p.m. Dawson and two deputies knocked on Karen's door. I watched from across the street, tucked behind my neighbor's hedge. I wasn't the only one. Porch lights were on at 3 p.m. Flat tires mysteriously fixed. Trash suddenly needed taking out. Everyone had an excuse to witness this moment. She opened the door in pressed khakis and a crisp HOA branded polo, clipboard in hand. Of course, Dawson didn't say much, just handed her a warrant. What they found inside wasn't just incriminating, it was damning. A full file cabinet labeled compliance unpaid. Offenders. Suspicious homes. She'd printed hundreds of fake citations, kept records of who paid and who resisted. One folder was labeled strategies for non-compliant homes, inside scripts for what to say when calling the police. Even one titled code-sounding phrases that work. Things like violating municipal easement expectations, undermining established aesthetics, impacting the security feel of the block. All empty phrases, all designed to sound legal while scaring people into submission. And then came the kicker. Photos. Hundreds of them. Taken through windows, over fences. Notes scribbled beneath loud music. Possible renter. Front yard has too many shoes. Possible multifamily. Too many cars. Might be immigrants. It wasn't just control. It was surveillance. It was profiling. It was targeted fear. The sheriff had enough. She was formally charged that evening with criminal trespassing, filing a false police report, harassment, fraudulent solicitation, unlawful impersonation of a public official. Karen's mugshot hit the local paper the next day. Front page, above the fold, clipboard not included. The headline, Fake HOA Queen Brought Down by Her Own Rules, and the backlash instant. The Facebook group was deleted within hours. Her compliance deputies denied everything. One even went on the local radio and said, "I thought we were just keeping things tidy, but the public wasn't buying it." At the next town meeting, the line to speak wrapped around the building. Rick, my neighbor, stood up and said, "I knew she was annoying. I didn't know she was dangerous." Mrs. Hernandez spoke next. "She made me afraid to decorate for Christmas." Then the single dad. "My son stopped playing basketball outside. She said it made us look urban." And finally, the Korean War vet. He didn't say much, just held up the flagpole base she'd made him take down and said, "Never again." That night, we voted unanimously to form a real neighborhood council, one with open books, no dues, and no authority to knock on your door over your rose bushes. Karen was gone, but what she left behind that needed rebuilding. Justice doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes it shows up as a neighbor with a rake, a retired teacher with a folder, or a war vet who finally says, "Enough." Karen took a plea deal, 3 misdemeanor charges stuck: trespassing, harassment, and unlawful solicitation. She paid $9,400 in restitution, agreed to cease all civic representation, and was banned from participating in any HOA board or neighborhood council in the county for 5 years. She sold her house and moved 2 towns over. Last I heard, she tried starting a community beautification alliance there. Didn't get far because people talk, and our story, it traveled. But this story was never really about her. It was about the silence that let her operate for so long, the fear that kept doors closed, the shame that made people think they were alone. That ended the day she trespassed in my yard. Because that fence, it didn't just divide property. It drew a line between what we used to tolerate and what we were ready to fight back against. We now have a legitimate neighborhood circle, not for enforcement, but for engagement. No dues, no compliance officers, monthly potlucks, free garden help. And every home got a hand-delivered pamphlet, Know Your Rights. No one has the right to fine you without due process. We called it the Fence Pact, a promise between neighbors that the only thing we'd enforce was decency and respect. Sheriff Dawson still drops by, sometimes just to wave, sometimes to chat. Last time, he looked at the fence now covered in jasmine. Just like I planned, and said, funny how a few boards and nails can bring down a whole empire. I said, she built it on fear. That stuff doesn't hold weight forever. I learned something I didn't expect while watching a fake HOA collapse. We don't need permission to build community. We don't need titles to hold power. And the minute someone tells you they represent the neighborhood, the first question should be, says who call to action? If you've ever been told to fall in line for the good of the neighborhood, ask who wrote the rules, ask who benefits, and ask what happens if you say no. Because real community doesn't come from clipboards or fines. It comes from people, and sometimes it starts with a fence.